All right, before I get started, I need to put on my freaking glasses because I can't see.
Gather around because now is Chris Reads Screens.
Wow. Oakland County, Michigan, 1976. Tree-lined suburban streets stretched across affluent communities north of Detroit, where children played freely in the parks and rode bicycles without supervision. You know, the good old days. Not that I was alive back then. And the area embodied middle-class American security. Well-maintained homes with manicured lawns, good schools, and a pervasive sense of safety that would soon become shattered. And during this period before cellular phones and instant communication and the interwebs, children regularly ventured out until dusk, expected to return home when the street lights illuminated. And this environment of perceived safety created the perfect hunting ground for a predator who would eventually launch what became the largest manhunt in US history at the time, involving a task force that would process over 18,000 tips and interrogate more than 1,500 suspects. So in the quiet suburban neighborhoods of Oakland County, Michigan, a chilling series of events unfolded between 1976 and 1977 that would forever change the community's sense of security. The area, known for its affluent neighborhoods and family-friendly atmosphere, became the hunting ground for one of America's most methodical child killers. And the nightmare would begin on February 15th, 1976, when 12-year-old Mark Stebbins left the American Legion Hall in Ferndale. And what should have been a routine walk home turned into an irreversible tragedy. 4 days after his disappearance, Mark's body would be discovered in a Southfield parking lot, carefully arranged on a pile of wood and dirt. And the autopsy revealed a disturbing level of premeditation, which is essentially planning the murder before it happened. Mark had been strangled and SA'd with a foreign object, and the rope marks on his wrist and ankles indicated he had been bound during his captivity, while 2 lacerations on his head suggested violent trauma. Just a real special place in the depths of the asshole of hell for the person who did this. It's just sickening. And obviously police would investigate, but they would come up with nothing. And less than a year later, on December 22nd, 1976, another family's world would collapse when 12-year-old Jill Robinson left home after arguing with her mother. Her bicycle was recovered behind a hobby store the following day, but Jill herself remained missing until December 26th, when her body was discovered alongside Interstate 75 in Troy. And perhaps most disturbing was the evidence that she had been cared for during the 3 days before her murder, still wearing her backpack and fully clothed when found. So the killer was obviously a monster, but there was a side of him that had remorse for these kids, or felt like he still needed to treat them like kids, like actually care for them. But it's just like, it's not even like in the realm of okay. There's no like, oh, that's kind of, no. He literally killed these kids. So, and the pattern continued on January 2nd, 1977, when 10-year-old Christine Millick vanished after visiting a 7-Eleven store. And her ordeal lasted 19 days before her body was recovered on a rural road in Franklin Village. And the killer had smothered Christine less than 24 hours before the placement of her body, which was positioned very carefully within view of nearby homes. A signature of the perpetrator's methodical approach. He wanted these kids to be found. The premeditation and planning before these murders is just like insane. Like he thought about how he was going to do it, when he was going to do it, and exactly how they were going to be found, and probably when they were going to be found as well. And the final confirmed victim, 11-year-old Timothy King, disappeared on March 16th, 1977, during a trip to a local pharmacy. And when found 6 days later in a shallow ditch along Gill Road in Livonia, Timothy had been SA'd with a foreign object as well as the first victim, and also suffocated. And most disturbingly, he had been fed Kentucky Fried Chicken, his favorite meal, shortly before his death. So it's like the killer is trying to make up for everything that he did at the end of it, just thinking that that's gonna wipe his slate clean in any way, shape, or form, when it's obviously not the case. He deserves to be, well, maybe I shouldn't say what he deserves, because I'm thinking a lot of things, and I don't think I could legally say it on the internet. But what distinguished these murders from other serial killers was the meticulous attention paid to the victims. Each body was found in public areas, meticulously cleaned and dressed, and the unnerving level of care to the perpetrator being dubbed the babysitter killer. And despite the different causes of death, investigators linked the cases through consistent physical evidence, including golden carpet fibers and white animal hair found on all the victims' clothing. And those golden carpet fibers and white animal hair would lead investigators down a very disturbing path, directly to a network of wealthy individuals with connections to child exploitation. Just the scum of the earth. And as detectives pursued these forensic clues, they uncovered a case far more complex than a lone predator, suggesting the possibility of powerful figures working to ensure certain suspects remained beyond the reach of justice. Just corrupt bullshit. So Christopher Bush emerged as one of the most compelling suspects in the investigation. The son of a wealthy General Motors executive, Bush had already been convicted as a PDF and maintain connections to an organized child porn network operating in North Fox Island. And the timing proved particularly suspicious. Police had questioned Bush shortly before Timothy King's abduction. And more disturbingly, evidence would link him to a child exploiting ring run by Francis Sheldon, suggesting access to vulnerable children through an established network, which is just like mind-boggling and horrifying to think about. And it's something that happens every day, and that people just, turn a blind eye to, and it's just so horrifying because it happens in other countries, but it is also happening in our backyards. So, I think it's an important topic no matter what. And in November 1978, investigators discovered Bush dead from what appeared to be sewer slide. Just easy way out. Piece of shit. And the scene raised immediate red flags. Blood-stained ropes lay nearby, and a hand-drawn image resembling victim Mark Stebbins hung on his wall. And the suspicious circumstances intensified when the entire Oakland County task force disbanded just days after Bush's death, having exhausted a $2 million budget. And some investigators later suggested his death may have been staged to prevent him from revealing accomplices of Power associates, which sounds right to me. Yet the case against Bush collapsed in 2012, when DNA testing excluded him as a contributor to biological evidence found on the victims. Bet you didn't expect that. And this forensic setback occurred despite the wealth of circumstantial evidence pointing to his involvement, which I still think he was involved in some way. Absolutely. Other suspects presented equally promising yet ultimately inconclusive leads. Ted Lamborghini, I know. A Detroit auto worker, I know, who operated a pedo ring in the Cass corridor during the same period, became a primary suspect in 2005. And convicted murderer Richard Lawson implicated Lamborghini during an interview, but when offered a plea deal to reduce his sentence in exchange for taking a polygraph regarding the Oakland County murders, Lamborghini refused. Just scum of the earth. And DNA evidence brought investigators to convicted PDF Ark Sloan in 2012, when forensic testing revealed that hairs found on the victims matched hair recovered from Sloan's vehicle. And curiously, the DNA didn't match Sloan himself, suggesting someone who had been in his car, or that he let borrow his car for, nefarious, murderous reasons. But perhaps most telling was James Vincent Gunnels, who had actually been SA'd by Christopher Bush as a teenager. And forensic testing found his DNA potentially matched a hair on victim Christine Miliak, though the statistical probability being only 1 to 150 proved too low for conclusive identification. And Gunnels has consistently denied any involvement. So time marched relentlessly forward while justice stood still. And nearly 5 decades after the horrific killings that terrorized Oakland County, the case remains unsolved despite remarkable advances in forensic technology. And for Timothy King's father, Barry, the quest for answers became his life's mission, which, like, how could it not, being a parent? You know, I just like, my heart just goes out to all these families. And this journey unfortunately ended in 2020 when he passed away without ever learning who murdered his son. And the systemic investigative failures point to disturbing possibilities. An exceptionally meticulous killer who left minimal evidence, protection of connected individuals through institutional interference, or fundamental errors in the initial investigation that can never be remedied. But whatever the truth, the Oakland County child killer case stands as a sobering reminder that even with extensive resources, justice remains tragically elusive for some victims, leaving their families to endure the cruelest of uncertainties. But my heart goes out to the victims and the victims' families, and whoever did this, I hope you're rotting in hell. Let's move on. Glasgow, Scotland in the late 1960s was experiencing the cultural upheaval common throughout Western societies at the time. The city's working class population found escape at venues like Barrowland Ballroom, a popular dance hall where young people gathered to socialize. And against this backdrop, a series of murders began on February 22nd, 1968, when 25-year-old Patricia Docker attended the ballroom. And the young nurse and mother left the venue alone and was discovered the following morning in a doorway near Langside Place, strangled and partially clothed, and her personal belongings missing from the scene completely. And Patricia Docker balanced complex responsibilities as her life was cut short. The 25-year-old auxiliary nurse managed night shifts while caring for her 4-year-old son, Sandy, during a period of separation from her husband, who served with RAF in Lincolnshire. And on that fateful February evening in 1968, Patricia told her parents she was visiting the Majestic Ballroom, but instead went to Barrowland, known for its over 25 nights where attendees often removed wedding rings, seeking temporary anonymity from their complicated lives. Some shady shit going on in the 60s, I tell you what. But Patricia would go to this ballroom and leave, and then obviously lose her life, which is extremely horrible, but would lead us to our second victim, which would be Jemima McDonald. And Jemima maintained a household as a single mother to 3 children: Elizabeth, who was 11 years old, Andrew, who was 8 years old, and Alan, who was 7. Described by acquaintances as clean and well cared for, Jemima ensured her children were properly looked after despite the challenges of sole parenthood. And her murder in August of 1969 fractured the family unit she had worked so hard to maintain. And the aftermath proved additionally devastating as her 3 children were separated and placed in different care homes, causing a secondary tragedy that extended beyond the initial death. Just so heartbreaking. And then we have Helen Puttick. Now, Helen Puttick would be the final victim, and she had recently returned to Glasgow with her husband, George, an army serviceman, and their 2 young sons, David and Michael. And the night of her murder in October 1969 represented a rare evening of personal freedom, a brief respite from maternal obligations, while her husband would remain home with her children. And the cruel irony that Helen was killed steps away from the domestic safety she had temporarily left behind underscores the tragedy's senselessness. But all 3 women shared significant commonalities beyond their connection to Barrowland. Each was a mother seeking brief independence from their demanding domestic responsibilities, and the over 25s night at Barrowland offered a socially acceptable outlet for married women to experience autonomy in an era of limited freedom. And perhaps most significantly, each was menstruating at the time of death, which is just so odd. But a biological detail that potentially influenced the killer's victim selection? Maybe. But the bright lights of Glasgow's Barrowland Ballroom concealed a methodical predator whose selection process went beyond mere opportunism. This venue, where married patrons often removed their wedding rings for anonymous encounters, provided the perfect hunting ground for a killer whose approach suggested calculated religious motivations rather than random violence. So he was seeking these people out specifically, people who were set out to be unfaithful to their partners. He didn't like that, not one bit. So when investigators initially focused on the Majestic Ballroom rather than the Barrowland following Patricia Docker's murder, they inadvertently compromised crucial evidence collection during the critical early hours of the investigation. And this error would prove significant as the pattern of Barrowland connections became apparent with subsequent victims. And witnesses consistently described the suspect as exceptionally well-dressed and articulate, attributes that distinguished him from a typical violent offender. His polite, charming demeanor allowed him to gain trust of women at the venue, facilitating their willingness to leave with him. So this calculated approach indicated premeditation rather than impulsive violence. This man was a hunter. And the religious underpinnings of the crime emerged most clearly during Helen Heddock's taxi journey, where her sister, Jean Langford, heard the suspect quote scripture and condemned the Barrowland as a den of iniquity. And Jean further recalled that he mentioned he did not drink but prayed instead, suggesting a strict religious upbringing that would later contribute to his infamous moniker. And forensic examinations revealed a disturbing ritualistic element at each crime scene. The deliberate positioning of sanitary items near the victim's body indicated the killers harbored specific fixations possibly connected to biblical notions of impurity. And this consistent pattern, combined with the strangulation method employed in each murder, pointed to a signature that evolved while maintaining core elements, potentially indicating the killer's growing confidence or adaptation to avoid detection. This guy was unfortunately smart and extremely calculated and extremely judgmental to consenting adults. And as the ritualistic elements at the crime scene became clear, Glasgow police mobilized in unprecedented numbers. What began as a standard murder investigation transformed into Scotland's most extensive manhunt. Yet it would ultimately fail despite groundbreaking tactics and compelling witness testimony. And the investigation pioneered forensic techniques never before seen in Scottish policing. Most notably, authorities created and widely distributed the nation's first police photo fit of a suspect in a murder case, plastering newspapers and television broadcast with the composite image. And the manhunt scope was extraordinary, with undercover officers dispatched to blend among Barrowland patrons in what the press dubbed as Marine Formation Dance Team, which is pretty awesome. Plainclothed detectives scanning the dance floor for anyone matching the suspect's description. And Jean Langford's account for the taxi ride with her sister Helen and the suspect provided investigators with extraordinary detail, a mixed blessing that just shaped the entire investigation. And while her testimony offered first-hand description of the killer's appearance, mannerisms, and religious rhetoric, over-reliance on her singular account potentially narrowed the investigation aperture, causing detectives to dismiss leads that didn't precisely match her recollection, which is damaging in investigations. I mean, obviously it's good to have that testimony, but I mean, we're not built to remember somebody perfectly, you know? Like, it needs to be broader than that. And we know that now, but that was all they had, so that is what they went for. And the undercover operation at Barrowland continued for months until late October 1969, when it was abruptly terminated. And the cessation came not from any investigative breakthrough, but due to complaints from proprietors about plummeting attendance figures as patrons avoided the venue now associated with a serial killer. Basically just because a bunch of people were just bummed that other people got killed and it ruined their swinger party, I guess, because that matters more than solving people's murders. I don't know. Decades later, in 1996, investigators exhumed the body of John Irvin McInnes for DNA testing, a costly operation that yielded inconclusive results and triggered substantial media backlash. And more troubling revelations emerged in 2022 when the BBC podcast Bible John: Creation of a Serial Killer alleged that McInnes may have been protected due to the familial connections with a senior officer involved in the original investigation. Again, just corruption everywhere. But in exhuming John's body, it would give this serial killer the name Bible John, mixing the scripture with the murders. This is just what it became, but it's not conclusive. And even convicted murderer Peter Tobin fell under suspicion due to the striking similarities in methods and victimology, but was ultimately eliminated because records confirmed he wasn't in Glasgow during the murders. So we're left with another I don't know, another unsolved serial murder case. And hopefully this bastard is dead. But that brings us to our next killer. So in the mid-90s, the Belgian city of Mons became the backdrop for a series of gruesome discoveries. Women began vanishing without a trace, only for their dismembered remains to surface in garbage bags across rivers and roads with unsettling names like Path of Worry and Hate River. And the precision of the cuts and the eerie choice of disposal sites pointed to a methodical and deeply disturbed killer. And despite the formation of dedicated task force, the investigation was plagued with mismanagement, lack of resources, and dead-end leads. And as the body count grew, so did the mystery. Was the killer a lone predator, a trained professional, or something even more sinister? And over the years, investigators pursued multiple suspects, some with disturbing ties to similar crimes. But as time passed, justice slipped further away, leaving behind a chilling question. Who was the Butcher of Mons, and why was he never caught? So in January of 1996, a pattern of disappearances began that would haunt the Belgian city of Mons for years to come. Carmelina Russo, a 42-year-old woman, vanished after visiting her imprisoned son on January 4th. And her disappearance might have remained just another missing persons case, but 17 days later, fishermen made a grim discovery in the Scheldt River in northern France. And it would be Russo's pelvis, which was deliberately severed from the rest of her body. And this would just mark the beginning of a series of methodical dismembered victims. And 6 months later, Martine Bone, a 43-year-old former sexual worker, disappeared on July 21st. And her dismembered torso was subsequently recovered from the Haine River. And investigators noted a particularly disturbing detail. Her breasts had been deliberately removed from her body, suggesting a sexual motivation behind the killer's methodology. Just a monster. And the precision of these cuts initially led authorities to consider medical training as a prerequisite for the predator, which would make sense. Or some sort of butcher, somebody who's worked with bodies before. And the pattern would continue into December when Jacqueline Leclerc, a 33-year-old mother of 4, went missing on the 22nd. And unlike the previous victims, her remains weren't discovered until March of the following year, when Officer Oliver Mott recovered garbage bags containing her severed arms and legs. And the delay between disappearances and discovery raised questions about the killer's storage capabilities. And by March 1997, 21-year-old Natalie Godart became the 4th victim. Though not involved in sexual work, investigators noted she had been described as promiscuous and was struggling with personal issues, severe enough that her child had actually been placed in protective care. And her torso was recovered from the same waterway as Bond's remains, the Haine River. And the killer's final known victim would be Begonia Valencia, a 37-year-old woman with schizophrenia who disappeared from Frameries during the summer of 1997. And only her skull would be recovered in the area of Hyon, suggesting an evolution in disposal methods or decomposition that prevented further remains from being located. He was just getting a lot better at hiding the remains. And forensic analysis would reveal disturbing detail that investigators initially overlooked. The preservation state of various body parts differed significantly. Some remains appeared relatively fresh, while others showed evidence of refrigeration, indicating the killer likely stored dismembered parts for extended periods before the actual disposal. And this suggested both access to suitable refrigeration facilities and a disturbing level of planning. And perhaps most chilling was the killer's apparent psychological signature in the selection of the disposal sites. Locations with macabre names became favored dumping grounds. Rue des Depots, literally dump street, Chemin de l'Inquiétude, which is Path of Worry, and rivers with unsettling names like Haine, which is hate, and Treux, which is jitters. And this deliberate selection of symbolically charged locations suggested a perpetrator who incorporated psychological elements into their methodology. So the symbolically charged disposal sites just reflected a killer with psychological sophistication. Yet the Belgian judicial system response would prove remarkably insufficient. Despite establishing a specialized investigative unit, authorities gradually abandoned their pursuit of the butcher while dismembered bodies continued to appear throughout the region. And in the aftermath of the killings, Belgian authorities formed the Corpus Investigative Unit under Magistrate Pierre Pellet. And this represented the nation's most concentrated efforts to identify and apprehend the methodical killer terrorizing Mons. However, from its inception, the unit faced substantial institutional constraints. Despite the brutality and sophistication of the crimes, Belgian officials classified the case as merely local, failing to allocate adequate resources for what was clearly a complex serial murder investigation. So the systemic dismantling of the investigative effort became evident as years passed without an arrest. And by 2007, what had begun as a substantial team had been reduced to only 4 investigators. And the dramatic reduction occurred even as the unit had examined nearly 1,000 complaints over 13 years, demonstrating a very troubling administrative indifference to solving the case. And the lack of modern forensic techniques available at the time further hampered investigators, limiting their ability to extract DNA evidence or effectively share information across international borders. And the investigation eventually developed significant international dimensions. In 2007, Montenegrin authorities arrested Smail Tolja, who emerged as the investigators' most compelling suspect. And Tolja's crime history included a strikingly similar murder in New York in 1990, where victim Mary Beale was dismembered and placed in garbage bags, a methodology nearly identical to the butcher's signature. And additionally, evidence against Tolja included his confirmed presence in Belgium during the Mons murders, his romantic connection to the New York victim, and bloodstain discovered in his apartment. Yet, investigators never secured conclusive proof linking him to the Belgian killings. And Tolja's death in a Montenegrin prison in 2012 permanently foreclosed any possibility of obtaining a confession or conducting additional DNA comparisons. But good riddance anyway. But other suspects emerged throughout the investigation. Jacques Antoine, a French doctor, became a person of interest after his son wrote letters to police accusing him of carrying black trash bags while living in Mons during the murder period. But these accusations ultimately held very little weight, undermined by inconsistencies and the son's peculiar focus on his father's firearm collection rather than behaviors related to dismemberment. Basically just a kid wanting to get rid of his father. And British citizen John Sweeney, convicted of dismemberment murders in both Amsterdam and London, represented another plausible suspect based on his potential presence in Belgium between his known killings. However, authorities never established a definitive connection between Sweeney and the Mons murders. Just another piece of shit, I guess. But the Butcher of Mons case exposed system failures in Belgian law enforcement, turning a major manhunt into a disjointed, under-resourced investigation. An expert suggests that the killer's meticulous planning skills and possible medical training allowed him to evade capture while preying on society's most vulnerable. And the case's mishandling has fueled discussions on understanding perpetrator psychology and underscored the need for interagency cooperation and proper resource allocation. Though officially unsolved, its legacy has influenced investigative reforms, at least, ensuring greater institutional accountability, changes that, while too late for the victims, may help prevent similar failures in the future. And with that, we move on to our last unsolved serial killer murder case. San Francisco's foggy beaches and secluded parks became the hunting ground for this methodical predator. Ocean Beach, with its desolate stretches of sand shrouded in mist, served as the backdrop for the Doodler's first confirmed murder. On January 27, 1974, the body of Gerard Earl Kavanaugh was discovered there, bearing multiple stab wounds. The 49-year-old's death marked the beginning of a pattern that would terrorize the city's gay community for 18 months, leaving bodies scattered across Ocean Beach, Golden Gate Park, and Lincoln Park. And the pattern linking these homicides together emerged gradually as each new victim was discovered. What began as seemingly unrelated crimes soon revealed a methodical perpetrator with consistent targets and methods. And Kavanaugh's defensive wounds indicated a violent struggle against his attacker. The 17 stab wounds demonstrating a level of aggression that would become a characteristic of the killer's approach. And the investigators initially treated this as an isolated incident, failing to recognize the beginning of a systemic campaign of violence. And only 5 months later, the killer would strike again. Joseph Stevens, known professionally as Jay, was discovered near Spreckles Lake with 5 stab wounds. And the location of his abandoned car suggested he had willingly accompanied his killer to the secluded area of Golden Gate Park, likely anticipating a sexual encounter. And as a performer in San Francisco's nightlife, Stevens represented a more visible target within the gay community. And the brutality escalated drastically with the 3rd victim. Just 12 days after Stevens' death, so his cooldown period has drastically gotten shorter, Klaus Christmann's body appeared at Ocean Beach. The German visitor suffered what investigators described as an extraordinarily vicious attack, with slashes to his throat so severe they appeared to be an attempt at decapitation. And this marked a significant intensification in the killer's violence. And then nearly a year would pass before Frederick Kappen became the 4th victim. The decorated Vietnam veteran received 16 precisely delivered stab wounds that pierced vital organs, including the heart. Evidence at Ocean Beach revealed his body had been dragged 20 feet through the sand, suggesting the killer was becoming more methodical in positioning his victims. And the final confirmed kill was Harold Gullberg, who was discovered in an advanced state of decomposition on June 4th, 1975 at Lincoln Park. And the 66-year-old Swedish-American's body told a different story. He had been dead for approximately 2 weeks and found with his underwear removed and pants unzipped, further confirming the sexual dimension of these crimes. But this wasn't even the end, as police had no clue during the investigation if more bodies turning up truly were from the same murderer or just random acts of violence. But behind the gruesome murders lay a method as distinctive as it was disturbing. The Doodler's artistic talent transformed ordinary bar encounters into deadly traps. His approach demonstrated a calculated precision that set him apart from other killers operating during the same period. The Doodler prowled San Francisco's vibrant gay scene, primarily targeting establishments in Castro, Polk Gulch, and Tenderloin districts. And popular venues such as Cinch Saloon and Cabaret Club became his hunting grounds, where he implemented his signature strategy. Rather than relying on physical intimidation, he disarmed potential victims through his artistic abilities, sketching portraits of men he encountered as a non-threatening means of introduction. One survivor actually recounted meeting the killer at a diner where he was drawing animals on a napkin, using this talent as a conversation starter. And this deceptively innocent approach allowed him to establish trust with his targets, who would just willingly accompany him to secluded locations, typically near water. And these isolated areas, known as gay hookup spots in the 1970s, provided both privacy for sexual encounters and the perfect setting for murder. And the violence of the attacks just indicated extreme rage, and the positioning of the bodies followed a consistent pattern, with victims discovered in outdoor locations near water. Furthermore, the killer would strip victims of identification completely, making it more difficult for authorities to connect cases and identify the deceased. But 3 individuals survived encounters with the Doodler, providing crucial details about his methodology. A European diplomat suffered 6 stab wounds but managed to escape with his life. And another survivor, described as a well-known entertainer, fled when a knife fell from the attacker's coat, revealing his deadly intentions before an attack could commence. And the 3rd survivor left San Francisco entirely and refused to cooperate with investigators. But the psychological profile that emerged suggested a perpetrator struggling with his own identity. The extraordinary violence directed at gay men indicated possible internalized homophobia, perhaps a person unable to accept his own homosexual desires and projecting that self-hatred onto others, which we've seen in multiple other serial killer cases involving the gay community. And witness descriptions consistently depicted a young black man between 19 and 25 years old, approximately 6 feet tall, who demonstrated both artistic skill and capacity for extreme violence. So the psychological assessment pointing to internalized homophobia took on a disturbing new dimension in late 1975. A psychiatrist contacted police about a patient who had confessed at the Ocean Beach murders. And this revelation brought investigators tantalizingly close to solving the case. Yet the Doodler would ultimately slip through their grasp due to circumstances that reveal as much about 1970s America as they do about the killer himself. And the investigation was led by a formidable team: Ortega Guilford and Earl Sanders, African-American homicide inspectors nicknamed the Soul Brothers, who had earned reputations for their meticulous work. They had constructed a very detailed case file that included a police sketch and narrowing list of suspects. And when the psychiatrist came forward with the information about his patient's confession, investigators believed they had finally identified their perpetrator. These guys look badass. These guys look badass as f. That's awesome. And under questioning, the prime suspect acknowledged his struggles with identity, but denied committing the murders completely. And without physical evidence definitively connecting him to the crimes, authorities found themselves in an evidentiary stalemate. The case now hinged entirely on testimony from the 3 survivors who encountered and escaped the Doodler. And the socio-political climate of the 1970s created an insurmountable barrier to justice, basically. Homosexuality remained classified as a mental illness by American Psychiatric Association until 1973, and the stigma persisted long after declassification. Gay men faced potential loss of employment, housing, and social standing if publicly outed. And for the European diplomat, testimony would have meant career destruction, basically. So their lives were on the line with the Doodler, but also their lives were on the line with the public. And for the entertainer and the well-known survivor, public identification as a homosexual threatened their livelihoods and personal safety. And relations between law enforcement and the LGBTQ+ community further complicated matters. Police raids on gay establishments were common practice throughout the 1960s and even early 1970s, fostering a deep institutional distrust. And many gay men viewed police not as protectors, but as persecutors, making cooperation with authorities a fraught proposition even where their own safety was at stake. And Harvey Milk, who would later become San Francisco's first openly gay elected official, captured the impossible position of the survivors when he stated, quote unquote, "I understand their position. I respect the pressure society has put on them." And this acknowledgement from one of the community's most prominent advocates highlighted the devastating reality. Societal homophobia had effectively granted the Doodler immunity from prosecution, which is just so up. So this serial killer got away with it due to society being shit, basically. Just a big society piece of shit. But despite the advances in forensic science and investigative techniques, these cases remain one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in modern history. The Oakland County child killer, Bible John, the Butcher of Mons, and the Doodler each left behind not just a trail of victims, but an enduring sense of unease. Their identities obscured by time, speculation, and incomplete evidence. While theories abound, from lone predators to potential conspiracies, justice has never been fully realized for the victims. And as cold cases continue to revisit with new technology, one pressing question remains. Could one of these elusive killers still be alive today, hidden in plain sight? I don't know, but all I do know is that I care about you and I want you to stay safe. So be safe out there, and let me know what other cases you would like me to go over down below. The cold cases are always good, I think, to shine a light on them. You know, you never know who's going to see, you never know what's going to happen. But yeah, I'm tired of these people. They're not people, they're monsters. I hope they're rotting in hell, and I hope you're just cozied up with some popcorn and a snack or something. But I hope you have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, or night, and I will see you beautiful face in the next video. Okay? Stay safe out there.